Our first question today comes from a listener who wrote in and asked, God said to Adam and Eve, "In the day that you eat of the fruit, you will surely die." And Adam and Eve lived long afterward. In what way did they die, and how does this relate to our human will?
In the day that you shall eat of it, you shall surely die. Usually the way this is handled is that people say, well, indeed, they did die that day. They died spiritually. And the spiritual death, in terms of what we call total depravity, did take place that day. But biological death did not for many, many centuries. Now others say, but nevertheless, they became subject to death that day because had they not sinned, they never would have died. And even though we point out that it was many, many years later that they did die, still death was part of their experience. Biological death was part of their experience that day. I personally handled that text this way. I think that what God was saying to Adam and Eve was, the day you eat of it, you will die. You will die that day, biologically. And that was the warning, that was the admonition, that was the penalty for disobedience that he held out before them. When they did do it, God had every right at that moment to exercise mercy and to postpone the final punishment of biological death to a later day, giving them the opportunity to be redeemed. Remember, his first act of redemption was clothing them by hiding the nakedness of which they were ashamed. And so I think that there's many times in the Bible where God says, if you do A, then this consequence will follow B. And then they do A, and then God doesn't carry out the threat. Rather, he gives mercy. So I don't think there's any great big problem with that. Now, the last part was, how does this affect the will? The will remains intact insofar as even fallen humanity, in the state of spiritual death, we still have a will. We still have a faculty of choosing, and we still have the ability to choose what we want. Okay? Now, to that degree, we have a free will, free to choose what we want. Yet at the same time, the will is not indifferent, as humanistic views of free will would teach, but rather that the will is in bondage to sin. I still do what I want to do, choose what I want to choose, but I choose according to my wicked inclinations, because my heart and affection to do the things that God wants me to do, that has turned to stone. And I no longer have any desire for pleasing God in my natural state. And that's why, unless I'm born again, I'll never have an ounce of desire or affection for the things of God. And so the will is free on the one hand in the sense that it still has the power of choosing. It's enslaved on the other in that it is held captive by the sinful desires and inclinations of fallen humanity.